In 1964, Ford decided to take a risk that no one saw coming. They wanted to build a car that could win on the drag strip, but instead of starting with a racing car, they took a regular family sedan, the Ford Fairlane, and turned it into something special. This wasn't just any car, it was the Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt, and it was about to change everything. The goal was clear. Ford didn't just want to make a fast car, they wanted to build a car that would dominate the racetrack. To do this, they made the Fairlane lighter and faster. They removed anything that wasn't needed, like extra seats and heavy bumpers. The Thunderbolt had only what was necessary to go fast. It was as if they took the Fairlane and made it into a true race car, with no extra weight to slow it down. Under the hood, they put in a powerful engine. The Thunderbolt came with a 427 cubic inch V8 engine that packed a punch, about 425 horsepower. This made the Thunderbolt one of the fastest cars of its time. But Ford didn't stop there. They also worked on making the car handle better, so it could race with the best. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a car that went fast, it was built to race and win. But here's where it gets interesting. Ford didn't plan to make thousands of Thunderbolts. They only built 100 of them. This made the Thunderbolt even more special. Ford wasn't just making a car for anyone who wanted one. They were making a limited number of cars for serious racers. The Thunderbolt became something rare, and because of that, it became even more valuable. Only a few lucky people would get to own one. When the Thunderbolt hit the racetracks, it quickly became clear that Ford had created something incredible. The car was fast, powerful, and handled like a dream. It wasn't just a car, it was a machine built to win. The Thunderbolt became a legend, and even today, it's remembered as one of the most exciting and bold cars Ford ever made. But this was just the beginning of its story. The Thunderbolt's journey was far from over. As the Thunderbolt raced onto the tracks, it quickly became clear that Ford had built something extraordinary. In the world of drag racing, where the fastest cars were kings, the Thunderbolt had all the right moves. It wasn't just about the power of the engine, it was about the way the car handled. The Thunderbolt was a well-balanced machine, designed to accelerate quickly, turn sharply, and handle the roughness of the track. It was everything a drag racer could want, and more. But just when Ford thought they had it all figured out, something unexpected happened. The competition started to catch up. Other car makers, like Chevrolet and Plymouth, saw the Thunderbolt's success and quickly started making their own high-performance cars. The Ford Thunderbolt was still fast, but the other companies were closing the gap. So, what did Ford do? They didn't sit back and relax. They took a step that surprised everyone. They decided to make only 100 Thunderbolt. It seemed like an odd decision, especially when people were starting to notice how amazing the car was, but this move actually made the Thunderbolt even more special. Those 100 cars weren't just racing machines, they were rare, and that rarity made them even more desirable. As more and more people learned about the Thunderbolt, its fame grew. Car enthusiasts, collectors, and racers all wanted a piece of this rare machine. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a fast car. It had become a symbol of a time when American muscle cars ruled the streets and the track. People loved the story behind it too. They knew Ford didn't just build this car for anyone, they built it for those who wanted to race, to win, to push the limits of what a car could do. And because only 100 were made, each Thunderbolt was a piece of racing history, a car that could never be replaced. But the Thunderbolt wasn't just about winning races. It became a part of a movement. It symbolized a time when car companies pushed each other to be better, faster, and more creative. The early 1960s were a golden age for American muscle cars. Every company wanted to outdo the others, and Ford, with the Thunderbolt, had started something that couldn't be undone. People started talking about it. They wanted to know more. They were fascinated by how a simple family sedan could turn into something so powerful and extraordinary. The twist came when, after all the attention, the Thunderbolt's production stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Ford's decision to make only 100 Thunderbolts wasn't just about rarity. It was a clever move to create a lasting legacy. The car was no longer just a race machine. It was now a collector's dream. Those lucky enough to own a Thunderbolt were now part of something bigger. They had a car that symbolized the peak of American engineering, a car that captured the spirit of competition and innovation in the muscle car era. And yet, as much as the Thunderbolt was revered, it never quite reached the level of fame that other legendary muscle cars did. Some people questioned whether it had truly lived up to its potential. After all, Ford had made only 100 of them, and they were designed for a very specific purpose: racing. Unlike other muscle cars that had broader appeal, the Thunderbolt was a one-trick pony, built only for drag strips. But oddly enough, this limitation worked in its favor. The Thunderbolt became even more legendary because it wasn't just another car. It was a rare, powerful racing machine that had been built for a very specific and thrilling purpose. Years passed, and the Thunderbolt began to fade from the public's view. Newer, more powerful cars took over the tracks, and people forgot about the little-known Thunderbolt. But that didn't mean it was forgotten by everyone. Car collectors and racing fans never lost sight of its importance. In fact, the Thunderbolt started to gain a new following. Over the years, its value increased, and the rare cars became prized possessions. People who had grown up hearing stories about the Thunderbolt's glory days now saw it as a symbol of the past, an incredible piece of automotive history that would never be seen again. By the time the 1990s rolled around, the Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt had become one of the most sought-after classic cars. Its reputation as a powerful, rare, and historic machine only grew with time, and in a twist that no one saw coming, it became a favorite, not just among collectors, but also among younger generations who admired its unique place in muscle car history. What had once been a limited production race car built for a few had turned into a legendary icon, a car that many had only dreamed of owning. Today, the Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt is more than just a car. It's a symbol of everything that made the muscle car era so special: speed, power, and the drive to push the limit. And though only 100 were ever made, the Thunderbolt's legacy lives on, reminding us of a time when Ford built a car that didn't just go fast, it changed the game forever. As the years passed, the Thunderbolt's place in automotive history solidified. It wasn't just a car anymore. It had become a piece of culture. For those lucky enough to see one in person, the Thunderbolt wasn't just a rare muscle car. It was a reminder of a time when American engineers were pushing boundaries, when cars weren't just for driving, but for living. It was a car built with purpose, to race and to win, and in its brief moment in the spotlight, it had done just that. But even with its success, the Thunderbolt's legacy faced an unexpected challenge. As the 1970s and 1980s rolled around, muscle cars began to fade. Environmental concerns, changing taste, and stricter regulations led to the decline of the big, loud engines that had once dominated the street. The Thunderbolt, with its roaring 427 V8 engine, seemed like a relic of the past. But just as quickly as the Thunderbolt had been forgotten by the mainstream, a new group of car enthusiasts discovered it. This group wasn't just looking for a car to drive. They were looking for history, for a piece of the golden age of American muscle. Car collectors, racers, and even younger generations who hadn't witnessed the Thunderbolt's glory days began to recognize its true value. Auctions became the place where these rare cars were traded, sometimes selling for a staggering amount. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a car anymore. It had become a symbol of performance and exclusivity, something that represented a time when everything about a car was meant to excite. The limited number of Thunderbolts only made them more desirable. With every passing year, it seemed like fewer and fewer people were able to get their hands on one, and those who did had something special in their garages. But the Thunderbolt story wasn't just about the cars that had been made. It was about the people who loved them. As the Thunderbolt became more recognized as a classic, owners began to share their story. They told tales of the drag strips where they had raced, of the days when the Thunderbolt would roar to life and leave everything else in the dust. Some owners even worked on restoring their Thunderbolts, keeping them in near-perfect condition as a tribute to Ford's groundbreaking engineering. These cars weren't just about horsepower and speed, they were about pride, passion, and the memories they carried. The Thunderbolt's influence spread beyond just the world of collectors. It inspired a generation of car enthusiasts who looked at the Thunderbolt as the blueprint for what a muscle car should be. It wasn't just about the numbers or the specs, it was about the feeling you got when you were behind the wheel, when the engine roared to life, and when you knew that no matter what was in front of you, you could take it down. Even today, the Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt stands as one of the most iconic cars ever built. Its legacy is a reminder of what happens when innovation meets performance, when a car isn't just made to get from point A to point B, but to break records, take risks, and capture hearts. The Thunderbolt, in its brief time on the market, set a standard that has endured for decades. It remains a symbol of American engineering at its finest, a car that continues to captivate those who love speed, history, and the thrill of the race. And in the end, it's the Thunderbolt's rarity, its racing pedigree, and its place in the golden age of muscle cars that ensures it will always be remembered. It may have only been made in limited numbers, but its impact on the world of performance cars is undeniable. The Thunderbolt wasn't just a car, it was a revolution. And that revolution is still felt every time a Thunderbolt roars down the road or across a racetrack. As the decades passed, the Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt continued to hold a place of honor in the hearts of car lovers everywhere. The roar of its 427 V8 engine, once the sound of victory on the drag strips, had become a rare, almost mythical sound. Only those who had seen the Thunderbolt in its prime could truly appreciate what it represented. But even those who hadn't lived through its racing days could sense the power and the history behind this incredible machine. The Thunderbolt's status as a collector's item only grew with time. Auctions regularly featured these rare cars, and as they became harder to find, the prices kept rising. It wasn't just about owning a piece of history. It was about having something that had been built for a purpose, something that had been crafted to race, to perform, and to win. For many, owning a Thunderbolt was the ultimate dream, a symbol of reaching the pinnacle of American muscle car culture. But with the rising value came a new kind of pressure. The cars were now treated with the utmost care, often sitting in collections, rarely driven, as if their value would be diminished by the very thing they were designed to do, race. But the Thunderbolt's spirit, its soul, lived on. It wasn't just a car for showing off. It was a car for living, for reliving that moment in history when it had made its mark. Some owners took their Thunderbolts out for the occasional race, pushing the cars to their limits, just as they had been built to do. For others, the Thunderbolt was a cherished relic, lovingly restored and maintained to perfection. Every scratch, every scuff on the car's body told a story. It was the story of a car that had been part of something bigger, a car that had raced against the best and come out on top. And then, in an unexpected twist, the Thunderbolt's legacy was reignited. As the muscle car era of the 1960s and early 70s faded into the background of history, a new generation of car enthusiasts began to rediscover the power and magic of these classic machines. They weren't just admiring them from a distance anymore. These were people who had grown up hearing stories of the Thunderbolt's dominance on the track, and they wanted to experience that power for themselves. It wasn't just about the history, it was about the thrill, the feeling of being behind the wheel of something that had been built to defy expectation. Car shows began to showcase restored Thunderbolts, and drag strips saw a new wave of these iconic machines. They weren't just on display in museums anymore, they were racing once again, just as Ford had intended. The Thunderbolt, it seemed, wasn't finished with its story. It had lived through decades of change, and now, in a way, it was experiencing a rebirth. People saw it not just as a car from the past, but as a symbol of a time when American cars were unmatched in their power, their performance, and their spirit. The Thunderbolt's return to the track sparked a new wave of appreciation. The younger generation, who hadn't experienced the car's initial run, began to see what made it special. The car was no longer just a rare collector's item. It had become a living piece of history, one that was still capable of impressing the world with its raw power. Every time a Thunderbolt revved its engine and raced down the strip, it was a reminder of the golden age of muscle car, a time when Ford had proven they could outsmart the competition and build something that could not only compete, but dominate. And in the end, that was the Thunderbolt's true legacy. It wasn't just about being rare or valuable. It was about the spirit of innovation and competition that it embodied. It was a car that had been built to break the rules and set new standards. And even after all these years, it was still doing just that. The Thunderbolt had left an indelible mark on the muscle car world. It was a car that never truly disappeared. It had simply waited, resting in the garages and collections of those who understood its significance. It wasn't just a car. It was a reminder of what could happen when a brand dared to dream big, to take risks, and to build something extraordinary. The Thunderbolt had always been a game changer, and in a way, it always would be. As the Thunderbolt's reputation continued to grow, it started to transcend its role as just a car. It became a symbol, a benchmark for all the muscle cars that followed. The rare few who had the privilege of owning one began to form a tight-knit community, sharing stories of their prized machines and the experiences they had while driving them. For many, owning a Thunderbolt was not just about having a piece of automotive history, it was about continuing the story that Ford had started. It was about living the legacy that had been built on speed, innovation, and a spirit of competition. As the years went by, Thunderbolts that had once been parked in garages or tucked away in collections began to emerge more frequently at car shows, rallies, and track events. Their owners weren't content to let them sit in a museum-like state. They wanted to feel the rumble of the engine beneath them again. Every time a Thunderbolt fired up, it was as if it was reminding the world of its power, of what it was built to do. The car's distinct sound and menacing stance were unmistakable, a constant reminder of the golden days of American muscle cars. However, not everyone was able to experience the Thunderbolt's raw power firsthand. With only 100 ever built, it was a car that remained out of reach for most people. But in some ways, that made it even more special. The Thunderbolt became a car that was more than just a machine. It became a piece of automotive folklore. Stories about these rare cars spread across the country, and for those lucky enough to catch a glimpse of one, it felt like seeing a legend in person. The Thunderbolt's limited production only added to its mystique. Some of the original cars were passed down through generations, becoming family heirlooms, while others were sold at auctions for record-breaking prices. The fact that only 100 were ever made gave the Thunderbolt an almost mythical quality. As time went on, it became one of the most coveted cars in the world, a collector's dream that few could own, but many could admire. Despite the high demand for Thunderbolts, the car's true magic lay not in its rarity or value, but in what it represented. The Thunderbolt was the embodiment of Ford's willingness to take risks and push boundaries. It was a car designed with one thing in mind: winning, and it did just that. In its short time on the racetrack, the Thunderbolt showed the world that Ford wasn't just another car maker. They were innovators, and they were willing to do whatever it took to stay ahead of the competition. As time passed, muscle cars evolved, and the Thunderbolt, though no longer at the forefront of racing, was forever etched into the history of American performance cars. Its legacy was solidified not just in the cars that were built, but in the spirit of the era it represented, a time when speed, power, and daring design were the driving forces behind every car. And even today, when you hear the roar of a Thunderbolt's engine or see one racing down the track, it's a reminder of the thrilling chapter in automotive history that it helped write. The Thunderbolt's impact reached far beyond the world of drag racing. It influenced countless muscle cars that followed, with many manufacturers taking inspiration from its design, power, and performance. It was a car that set the standard for all others in the muscle car world, and its presence on the track was enough to make any competitor nervous. Ford had succeeded in creating something that wasn't just a car, it was a statement. The Thunderbolt said that Ford was here to win, and they were willing to take the competition head-on, with no fear and no apologies. As the Thunderbolt story continues to be told, it remains a testament to the power of innovation and passion. The car was built to be fast, to win races, and to leave an impression, and it did all of that and more. For those who have had the chance to own one, race one, or even just admire one from a distance, the Thunderbolt will always hold a special place in automotive history. It's a car that continues to inspire, to excite, and to remind us of the days when American muscle cars were the kings of the road. And in the end, it was never just about the 100 Thunderbolts that were built. It was about the legacy they left behind, a legacy that will never fade.